Great turnout. Thanks for coming. Okay, so, David Jaffe.
Lorne Lanning.
Right on. Thanks for coming. And I just had the pleasure of getting to know David a little bit this year. And I was kind of drawn to the way that David really doesn't speak his mind much, which is good. Because it shines a lot of light on things that I think a lot of us face, and we have an opportunity here to talk about some of those things. So just a quick show of hands. How many of you are designers? About 35%. And producers? And executives? Okay. All right. Good. Good. Press? Okay. Okay. We're in trouble.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, Roland.
I'm fully prepared to get fired for this song.
Well, that's my intent.
All right, fair enough.
So it's also interesting because, I've been...
Wait, who's here from Sony? Is anybody from Sony? Do I know you? Do I work for you?
Oh, you're screwed.
I don't see Phil's head, so I think I'm okay. Very good.
That's good, too, because one of the things we get to sort of discuss a little bit is I come from running an independent studio with my partner, Sherry. And David comes from having creative control inside a much bigger entity. And it's faced with a lot of the same problems, but it's also faced with some very different problems. And another real quick assessment. How many people want to get their own IPs and games made? Yeah. How many people have? Yeah. Okay. So, hope to shine more light on how that may happen and the trials and tribulations to get there. Sound good? All right. So the first thing I want to go through, and I'm going to hit on certain points. One being the concept. I want to understand more about how you went about it.
Okay.
The second will be how you get through the green light phase.
Okay.
Which is something, we see a lot of talks, but they don't necessarily hit on that, and that's one of the most important stages. And then production, relationships with the teams.
Yep.
Really important topic.
Yes.
And then going through release. Then a little bit towards the future, games as a medium, possibilities.
Okay.
And then we'll sort of come back as life as a designer.
Okay.
And a path to suicide.
Whatever, like I said, whatever you want to know, I don't care.
Okay. So concept. I've read things that said you were always inspired by the Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Really excited you to make these different experiences in games, and it really led to God of War. And I also heard that God of War was the game that you always wanted to create. It was kind of a dream to come true and make it happen.
Yes.
So aside from those two elements, what was the real juice that sparked the idea for God of War?
Here's the bad news. I just saw Shu. So now I'm I have to be all careful now. But that's my boss right there, so fuck. Anyway. So...
Shu Yoshida, one of the people...
Yoshida, yes, VP of production of...
But I'll also add, one of the few people in the industry who's really supporting creative endeavors today.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely.
Shu.
It's interesting because I actually just came from lunch with Heather, the author of Chaplin or Chapman? The author of Smart Bomb, which if you guys haven't read it, it's a very cool book on the industry. So, but we were talking about this, about other designers and what their inspirations are, and about how I've always felt like an outsider amongst designers because I don't tend to like a lot of the games that designers like. Like Seven Cities of Gold, I appreciate. I'm like Adventure 2600. That's my Seven Cities of Gold. Mask of the Sun on Apple IIe. Is there an echo, or is that just me? Just me.
It's an echo.
There's an echo. Okay. And so I think when you talk about inspirations for God of War, there was definitely coming to it from more of a real desire to work on what I felt would be my ultimate action-adventure game, which is what I grew up loving. Flashback, Mask of the Sun, adventure, Out of This World, all the way up to Deus Ex and Eco. And so it was really just an opportunity to really try to sort of see if I could bring anything to that medium. And so when you have that opportunity, which at least, I think it's safe to say is relatively rare in the industry, you really do have to kind of dig into what inspires you and what moves you and what really keeps you going as a creative individual. And for me, it was Raiders, and it was Clash of the Titans, and it was Marvel Comics. And so I really wanted to make a game that spoke to all of those things. I had been partnered, luckily, with the team that did Kinetica, which wasn't a very big hit critically or commercially, but technologically it was a relatively, actually quite impressive title on the PS2 in terms of, it was clear that team had a real mastery of the hardware. And so the idea of being able to work with a group that really knew how to push that box, mixed with my ability and my desire to really sort of speak creatively in the medium, I think was just a really good mix, and that's sort of how it all came together.
Okay, so this is how many years ago?
Well, this was 2001 and about 40 pounds ago.
40 pounds less.
Less. Yes, less.
Okay.
Yes. Anyway.
You mentioned some games that, for me, were huge inspirations too. Flashback, Out of This World. But also God of War, I felt like took elements of historical games that people might have thought, well, we're moving towards something there. We're moving into POV only, or we're moving into non-cinematic type experiences.
Yes.
And for me, those early games, they kind of inspired our first game, Maeve's Odyssey. But I also felt with God of War that it was kind of in a similar effort in that it was taking something that people didn't necessarily think was going to be dead on target for the market for this period in time.
Yes.
It was a little bit retro in some respects.
Yeah.
But while a lot of designers or publishers were sort of abandoning that path, from the outside it looked like you were looking at it saying, wait a minute, we have yet to really fully exploit that path. I mean, that's kind of how I looked at the side-scroller back in '94,
right.
Was that, wait a minute, it hasn't gone to where it can go yet. Why does everyone think it needs to be 3D? So we tried something different. But the challenge with looking at a sort of genre or play style that may not be what the marketing department thinks is the hip and happening, cover winner right now.
Yes.
How do you push through that idea when you're, for the most part, creative executives and creative people like yourself are met with skepticism? I mean, that's my experience. We're met with skepticism. We're not met with excitement. Now, is it different for you?
It's not like, I go to work and there's a blank check sitting there. But, you did mention Shu. I have another boss, Alan, Phil Harrison. There is, it isn't spin. I mean, hopefully some of you guys know me well enough that I'm not up here spinning. I mean, I have issues with the industry. I have issues with certain things. But one of the reasons I've been at Sony for 13 years is because there is a genuine interest in pushing the medium. There's a genuine interest in saying, what can we do that's cool and new and different? And if you look at the slate of Sony first-party games, we make a lot of sequels, but every year we're always putting out brand new, interesting stuff. From iToy to Shadow of the Colossus that got best game last night, fuckers. I'm kidding.
Actually, we both lost in another category.
We lost everything last night, man. We lost everything.
I've never won one of these damn awards.
I haven't either. I was nominated with the Incog guys for Twisted Metal Black and didn't get shit.
Sucks, doesn't it?
It does suck. You know what? It's funny. I kind of figured. That's whatever. No, it hurts. It sucks, man. It sucks to lose every single award that you're up for. But
they say, wait a minute. But they say, like, being nominated is a great honor.
It is. Come on.
But when you hear the guys say, hey, it's great just to be nominated, I mean, do you believe it?
I do believe it. Yeah. I feel that way. I mean, it was a genuine. I mean, because the reality is, I was talking to Shannon, the producer, last night, and it's like, after I kind of went off and licked my wounds for about an hour at the Sony party, I was like, it hit me in talking to her that I wouldn't have changed anything. I mean, God of War is the game that I wanted to make and that I wanted to work with the team to make. And so maybe it didn't win all the awards it could have, although we've certainly been granted numerous awards. Yeah. It doesn't matter. I wouldn't have been like, if I could get the GDC award if I just did this, that, and the other. That's not why I did it.
Right.
So that would have been cool, but
still sucks, huh?
It does suck.
Yeah. But it is, just to comment on awards in general, this is one of the things that I think is working for the industry, is that when we have different award shows that have different processes for how they vote and how they're submitted and whatever, I mean, different people have different beefs with every one of them. But the key is that we have more of them. Because, like we went to the AIS Awards and you just... you and your team just cleaned up.
We cleaned up. We did pretty good at DICE, the Spike Awards, which I know you guys think, and
The most credible awards.
It's not as credible as DICE in this one, but it is pretty fun though. It's a cool award. Anyway, sorry.
But that's one of the things that makes it work, is because different communities, different processes of voting, different things will get recognized. And my personal belief is that we need a wider spread of recognition for the talent in the business, and not a more narrow one, or not a single exclusive one. So anyway, just a comment. All right. So, who do you present to inside Sony? Are you presenting directly to Shu?
Well, I'm presenting to Alan and Shu and Phil. I mean, the chain
now, what's
goes...
Alan's role?
Alan runs Santa Monica.
Okay.
And then Shu is Alan's boss, and Phil is Shu's boss. And I don't know who Phil reports to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
God.
But God, yeah, Ken. And then it goes from Phil to Ken to God. No,
his name's Ken.
Right.
Yes.
No, but seriously, I mean, I will say one of the neat things and challenging things about sort of Sony's new structure is that, like a lot of probably companies that you guys work with, there is a much bigger emphasis these days on worldwide success versus territory success, because the budgets of the titles are getting so high. And so that is proving to be not a challenge in a negative way. It's like when Alan told me, it's like, okay, now you're going to have to come up with ideas and work with teams that come up with ideas that don't just appeal to the American audience, which I think I'm particularly suited for compared to, say, the Japanese audience. At first, there was a little bit of sort of nervousness of like, oh, this is a big challenge. But then it's like, it goes back to losing the awards last night. It's like, I love working for Sony. I've been there for 13 years. I hope they'll have me for 13 more, if not more than that. But the reality is, I come to the office and I do what I genuinely am passionate about. And so far, that's proven to be a fruitful, exciting relationship for Sony and for me. And so if it turns out that the designs that I either champion or come up with on my own are designs that Sony's kind of like, yeah, these aren't really working for us, it's not really a challenge, because I'm not really going to change much of what I do. I'm just going to kind of I'm going to open the valves a little bit more and go, okay, well, could we do some slight changes to appeal to Japan and maybe Europe, or even to America? But I think if you start working that way, I think you can be very successful. I don't know about you guys. I just came from the Nintendo keynote, and it was fascinating to me the fact that there seems to be, I mean, I've never worked for Nintendo, but just listening to a lot of those guys speak, there seems to be a genuine attempt at, let's make decisions based off what we think there is a gap in the market. And clearly that kind of high-level thinking occurs at Sony as well. But for me, that wouldn't be a very satisfying way to sort of live my creative life. And so right now it's been okay that I can still exist within that structure. But, will that be 5 years from now? I hope so, but I don't know,
And where's the marketing department in that decision? Are they on the tail end of it? Is it... I mean, a lot of publishers today, the marketing department is making
I talked to somebody. Who did I talk to? They're not there anymore. They were at a very popular company, and this guy told me that in that company, the marketing person sits right next to the head of production in the sort of bullpen of developers. It's that incestuous. I talk with marketing almost every day. I have Jeff Reese, who's our marketing guy for Santa Monica, and I'm calling him 1 or 2 times a day going, hey, I got this idea. What do you think of this? What do you think? They don't have a... they're not going to say you can make this title or not. That lies with Shu and Phil and Alan. But certainly, they're going to take market factors into consideration. The nice thing, though, is that Sony's like, hey, yeah, you can make a quirky, strange title. Just don't go out and spend $30 million on it. If you want to make something weird and strange, let's talk about that. But, you need to be realistic. And that, I don't look at that as a creative individual and go, that's horrible. That makes sense to me. If I'm going to make something that only has a chance of reaching 250,000 people, it's great to know that I have that opportunity. But I don't think it's unrealistic to assume that I should expect, or I don't think anybody would expect to have $20 million to make that kind of game. And I think when you look at, for the first time since I've been to GDC, I went to that thing out there where they have all the independent games. I mean, there's some really fucking cool stuff out there, and it's
that's where a lot of the creative stuff is.
Yeah, and it's like, that stuff isn't costing $20 million. So I think it's cool. If you saw Loco Roco yesterday, there's a lot of cool PSP stuff and PS2, and I can't talk about the other stuff coming, that is clearly unique and creative and rewarded at Sony. It's just that I think there's a nice mix.
What was the one last night, the Hamster Mash?
I played that today.
What was it called?
Unreal Mod. It was fun
Hamster
too.
Bash.
Yeah.
Unreal Mod.
Yeah, it's good.
It's great. Not one that I see the marketing department's going, yes, we know how to sell that.
Yeah, but let me tell you something. I don't know if I can say this. Shu's falling asleep, so I think I can. There is a title that I mentioned that Loco Roco was a title that I saw certain individuals that weren't in product development saying, oh, we don't really see how this is going to be ultra successful. Mm-hmm. But, Sony's behind it, and it's a great title. And so I think just because marketing doesn't necessarily always get a certain title doesn't mean that they're not smart enough to know that there is an audience out there for more unique titles. I mean, we are the studio that put out Eco and Shadow of the Colossus and Parappa the Rapper, and, so. But it is tough.
Please don't stop.
Yeah.
So is it, at Sony, is it your job to be proposing game ideas, or was it an opportunity that arose? I mean,
I started as a tester proposing game ideas. I mean, I was proposing game ideas when I was like 3 weeks in. Mm-hmm. And so I've just never stopped. And now my official job is to be responsible for the creative output of Sony Santa Monica. And sometimes that means it's an idea that I have that's my own. Sometimes that means it's simply that I find a developer or I find individuals within Sony or Sony Santa Monica that have an idea, and I kind of get behind that and work with them on that. And in cases where sometimes it doesn't need to be worked with, it just needs to be championed and sort of pushed forward, I'll do that within, the ability that I have. I mean, it's certainly... I don't necessarily think anybody at Sony thinks if Jaffe's behind an idea, we automatically get behind it. But I think it has more to do with squeaky wheel gets the grease, and I'm pretty squeaky. So from
onset of pitching that idea to getting a green light on that idea, 2 questions. 1, how long a span of time is that? And 2, what type of materials are you putting together to really, convince them that this is a worthy idea?
We tried to have some kind of official... we've explored everything from doing focus testing on the net with just like single paragraph concepts to sending art out to sort of, we've tried a lot of different things, and every title's different. There are titles that somebody might work on for 6 months and they really believe in it, and it just never gets the traction to get anywhere.
Let's take God of War.
God of War, I hate to keep pointing out Shu, it's just that, there is knowledge here. There is information, and I remember sitting in his office, and he looks at me and he says, when I pitch him God of War, he says, there's nothing innovative about this at all. I don't know if you remember that conversation that we had. And I was like, you were right. And I said to Shu, just please, for the love of God, trust me. It's not about innovation. This one's about execution. This one's all about sort of expression through mechanics and medium that we already know works. It's just sort of executing it in a certain way. And, I was so grateful that he was like, all right, go ahead and do it. And so, God of War wasn't that hard to get off the ground, but there have been other titles that have been very difficult to get off the ground. And sometimes it has to do with upper management genuinely just not thinking there's potential, or it being too expensive, or just, those resources that I would want to use for my game being more important to be used in other places at that time, given sort of what the company needs. So...
Was it a rollout in terms of funds and team members or things like that to prove it, or did they say,
no,
okay, we're going to do it?
It was pretty much we're going to do it, and we certainly built the team over time, but we started with a relatively big team. And
how many members?
Shannon, are you here? How many members did we start with? 20, yeah. And for a long time, it was like, what is this game? It looks like crap. It doesn't play well. And we kept thinking we were going to get canceled, and we'd take it to marketing meetings, and it would be... I remember we used to do this thing where we'd go to San Diego every Christmas, and we'd all show the games that we were working on. And that was the same time, I think, that Naughty Dog was there with Jak and Daxter, and Insomniac was there with Ratchet. And these things looked so amazing, and it was just like... And then we show our little game, and it crashes, and it looks like crap. And Kratos, who's the hero of God of War, used to be this, I'm not joking, he used to be this very African Rasta-looking guy with dreads and stuff, and it just looked like just terrible. And so I was expecting an email from my boss saying, maybe it's time for a new Twisted Metal.
Yeah.
But they kind of kept it going, and eventually it kind of found its... And that's the other thing, is that, there is that fine line, I imagine some of you guys have experienced, of just because it's not working now doesn't mean it won't eventually work. And it's a real kind of magical art to knowing when it's time to pull the plug and when it's time to kind of, keep it on life support. And
so what do you think is that kept it on life support?
Well, I think that's Alan and Shu and maybe some people from marketing. And that,
Okay, but they're making their decisions, right?
Yes.
And that's based on, but it has to be coming, as the main creative force driving it.
Yes.
Right? Do you think that's partially based on just your tenacity that it's going to work?
I would have to assume that me being vocal and me being passionate and me being willing to be unpopular even within the halls of Sony, I mean...
We'll get to that.
I have to assume that there's value to that. It's a pain, and I don't think everybody likes it. But the reality of it is that I'm guessing now. I'm just speaking for these people, and I've never actually spoken to them about this, and maybe I should one day. I'm guessing that they value the fact that at the end of the day, all I really care about is pleasing the player. And that, yeah, Jaffe's a pain in the ass to deal with, and he should be more respectful. And, my boss is always like, I deal with, the Japanese sometimes, and I'm clearly not Japanese. I don't understand the culture. I don't understand a lot of the nuance of that culture, and it's grating sometimes because I'm just like, are you saying yes or are you saying no? And it's like, a lot of times, it's a different cultural thing. I mean, and it's like, I just really want the answer. And a lot of times when you're dealing with different cultures like that, they have a totally different way of answering that question, which as a dumb American, I don't understand. So,
So, Chu, you're here. I mean, I'm putting you on the spot. Was it David's, belief in that maybe the executive class is unsure, money's being spent, but here you've got Jaffe going, no, it's going to work. He's just passionate about it. Is that what's driving the decision, or did you believe in the game? I mean, what I'm getting down to, did you believe in the game at the times of trouble, or did you believe in the designer? So he's thinking hard,
When the concept was first presented, I was skeptical about the team's ability to execute. That was the point from Dave that it was execution. But what games have the team done? They've done pretty games. But it was about the character control. And I challenged can you do what like Naughty Dog or Insomnia are good at, or some of the Japanese companies are good at. And what I saw going in a couple of months was really wonky camera. And getting camera done is really challenging for any game. And that I felt, this team might have something. So I kind of forgot about the game for another few months. And the next time I went down and saw the game many months after the combat system was totally overhauled. And it started to show that very chaotic, but still you feel like controlling the character. So, that was maybe in 1 year, into or something, sometime into that. At that point, I kind of started feeling comfortable about what they did.
I think to that point there is, in fact, did you guys see the God of War 2 thing yesterday? Did anybody see that? Okay, well, that sucked for about a month. And it was Corey, who's the director, and Steve, who's the producer, and me, who's the creative director, constantly going back and saying, this isn't going to show well. It's got to get better. The Cyclops animation isn't good. And to Shu's point, the tenacity comes in there, in that you have to sort of have a conscious knowledge of the fact that there are key times when your title is going to get looked at. And in our case, we felt we better make sure that we had what we call sort of marketing moments that aren't necessarily for marketing, but things that people talk about and things that people remember. And those are sort of conscious hooks that we put into the design and that we put into the schedule of the production to make sure that we kind of leave people with a good taste in their mouth. Even though the rest of the game may be in shambles, at least those pieces are starting to work. So,
core play.
Yeah. Well, not really even core play.
Core.
Just shtick. Just just flash.
Gloss.
And sometimes the flash is play, and sometimes the flash is just flash. But it leaves you with a good taste in your mouth and a good memory of what that game is, and it keeps you from euthanizing it. If you're one of the execs.
When you're making a game, doesn't it feel like that's almost seemingly what you just keep heading for, is those flash moments to keep the game aligned, keep the game financed, keep
I think
the external forces?
I would imagine it's different in your position in terms of running your own company. With us, there was a sense that once we it was almost like turning the engine over. Once we got the Shoes and the Phils and the Allens and the marketings of the world behind it, then we were able to kind of back off a little bit and say, okay, you know what? For the next 3 months, you're not going to see anything. It's all going to be under the hood. But then you'll see something really cool in 4 months from now. And they were cool with that. So,
right. No, it is different because usually the executive staff changes at another publisher. And then the new staff comes in and goes, no, we don't like this game. And so then the independent developers are scrambling again and again and again to keep up with the changes of executive staff at the different publishers.
You know, it's funny. There's a part of me that, you know, oh, shit, here's Tim. Fuck. That's the lead programmer. He hates me. Say hi, Tim. There he is.
He's out of here.
He's leaving. He's leaving. Look, I got him to leave.
Okay. So now you touch on something really important. I'm asking about the executive staff because ultimately that's where the money's flowing from. And even at 20 people, it's a lot of money that's being burned. Yep. And then you're trying to project a schedule that's going to eat a lot more people into the production along the way. So it's projecting even more dollars. But then you've got, in the trenches now, you've got a team below you.
Yes.
And as the creative driving force on something that isn't necessarily proving itself right away. And in my opinion, anytime we do something different, and this is where I think the industry is suffering a lot of growing pains, is different things don't manifest well quickly. They just don't. It takes a lot of experimentation, it takes a lot of time. And at the early stages, you just really need to have that belief that it's going to work. Because if you don't, you're just going to get killed. No one will support it. But your own team will start rebelling against you. Actually, when it's going good, your own team will start rebelling against you. Yeah. And this is kind of what I want to touch on. Because I've heard different things at different times. We've actually had people on our teams that have worked on projects of both of ours.
Yes.
And some really talented people.
Yes.
And but at the same time, they have a different role.
Yes.
And now, what starts happening is this is something that I see happening with a lot of creatives and a lot of designers. And I think the higher you get in terms of being able to have creative control, the more that this comes back at you. And oftentimes, when you least suspect it. So your team, what happens? When someone's striving for excellence above the line, at the creative level, the team, in my experience, usually says, this guy doesn't know what he wants.
Very accurate description of what occurred. I mean, I mean, I wasn't the most liked guy on the God of War team, I can tell you that. And a lot of it was that. It was constant changes to the design.
But now, why are you changing the design? I mean,
this is what I say to the programmers, it's like, I don't hover over a programmer's shoulder and say, you just typed a line of code that you don't like. How dare you hit delete and change it? Mm-hmm. Or I don't go to an artist who's drawing and say, are you sure you want to use that shade of red? But with designers, because there really isn't much of a, even if the studios gave you 8 months or a year to do pre-production, it's really irrelevant because, as you guys know, it's not until you actually get into the meat of making the game do you really realize what's working, what's not working, and whatnot. And the game production really needs to support that freedom. But to a lot of individuals who have more structured jobs, understandably, they're looking around going, what is this guy doing? First he wanted this, now he wants this, now he wants that. And, to Shannon's credit, who again was the producer, people, it's a cliche, but people talk about producing as like managing chaos. And she's particularly good at that, in that, people were in her office every day. Even to this day, she'll tell me, I'm not going to tell you how many people, what they said about you and what they complained about you, but the reality is her job was to take all that chaos and sort of funnel it into a productive process, and she did. Because, the team was just like, he doesn't know what he's doing. And the reality of, it's not that I didn't know what I was doing, it was that I was going through the creative process. I was going, well, this is what I thought would be fun, and this that I thought would be good here is better over there. And I think a lot of the reasons maybe games aren't as satisfying in some cases as they should be is that the production process doesn't allow for that. And that's why God of War was so about, for me, making a game that I wanted to play. And I love action-adventure games. But what I hate about action-adventure games is the repetition, doing the same thing, seeing the same art, until after about the third hour, you're like, you know what, I've seen it all. Mm-hmm. You're basically now just padding it out and every now and then tossing in a Mode 7 land speeder level, just to kind of keep me interested. And so it was nice that Shannon was able to sort of build a production around the realities of what the creative process is. Now, it didn't make everybody happy, and I joke. I mean, what's funny about Tim is whenever I see Tim outside of work, him and I get along great. But the minute we're in work together, and he's speaking about this tomorrow in his talk, I think the coder mentality is very regimented. It's very focused. They know what they want. They want it to be very, driven by sort of more logic than what the creative process really allows for. And so that created a lot of headbanging, and it was challenging, but I think ultimately, both because of what Tim brought to it and what I was able to bring to it with the designers, it made for a better game. And so in going down in the future, I think the lesson that we take is don't be afraid of the chaos. Chaos is good. Chaos is your friend. Just make sure you're responsible with that chaos so it doesn't get out of hand, but you have to kind of let it just go nuts a little bit, because that's how you're going to get good creative work.
Right, because if it's been done, then you would have a perfect roadmap on how to achieve it. But no one is buying what's been done.
I went to a session yesterday that it was a round table. I didn't get fucking called on. I'm still pissed about this. I did not get called on the fucking round table. But anyway, not to say that I should have been called on. I'm just saying that I had my hand raised and nobody else did. I still didn't get fucking called on. But it was about procedural design and how you deal with working with designers and such. And the guy who ran it has actually made one of my favorite games of all time. So this guy knows a hell of a lot more about game design than I do. But at the same time, I couldn't help thinking that there was sort of an attempt, it seemed, to sort of really place the design process in a very sort of formulated, regimented structure of how it works. And to an extent, you don't want to be reckless with the company's money, but at the same time, it was like, to me, that was a little bit too far. It's like you got to let it run. You know what I'm saying?
And that's my experience as well. And there's probably more mistakes than there are successes as a designer who's trying to do innovative things. But the creative process is the proper label for this. And the creative process does have a lot of chaos.
It does.
And it's not as mappable as everyone would like. Especially
and it's everybody else's job on the team.
And especially when they're going, but I did what I was told to do fine. And now this is when, and you go, but that's not working for the end goal of the play, of the experience we're trying to deliver. And they go, but I did what I was supposed to do fine. Now they're in the HR, or now they're talking to the producer. And they're going, this guy doesn't know what he wants. And now they're going out to lunch.
Everybody's in development for the most part. How many fucking times on a game is it someone's going to save the game? It's like 3 or 4 months in and it's not going well and somebody's going to save it. Somebody goes to the producer or the head of production and it's like, they've got a plan for fixing things. And it's just like, you know what? It's like 8% of the time maybe they're right. But, 92% of the time it's like, let the process breathe a little bit.
And about 80% of the time it's the guy who's not doing his own job.
Right.
That has all the solutions to fix the whole job.
That's right.
Okay. So, okay, now, we're human beings, and these are people you work with every day. And this gets into the human relationship of, you wish that you showed up at work and people think you're a peer, and hopefully they think you're intelligent and talented, and that they're just going to sort of follow your lead. But, I have never seen it go down that way.
I have the loneliest job at Sony Santa Monica. I do.
Now, a lot of guys, they can't, handle it's not necessarily the right word, but they don't want to live with going home, feeling that your team is rebelling against you, that they don't think you know what you're doing. They are going to lunch talking about how they're going to out you.
I wasn't worried about being outed. But,
right. Yeah. So emotionally, what gets you through that?
I'm saying,
What gets you through it?
I am not joking. When I was going to do my dice pitch, and I said, what, it's too jokey. I wanted to do more of a from-the-heart dice pitch. But I was putting together this slideshow, and when you wouldn't tell it from my shape, but I love to spin. Unfortunately, I like to eat more than I like to spin. But and so when I would spin sometimes, and as I get made fun of very much, I love pop music. I don't like Radiohead, and I don't like I like Phil Collins, and I like Christina Aguilera, and all that good stuff.
How about Britney?
I liked her earlier stuff, But anyway, the reality is I would be spinning and there's this song that Christina Aguilera sings and I would just be thinking of Tim the whole time because it's like a fuck you song. And it was written, I guess what I got from VH1 was that Britney Spears and Aguilera have this thing. They don't like each other. I don't know anything about it. That's all I know.
No, you do know about
it. That's all I know. That's all I know. And I wouldn't be embarrassed to tell you guys the whole story. I just genuinely don't know. But and so in this song, I guess she writes this song. What is this fucking song called? I don't know what it's called, but it's kind of like one of the attitude songs. So I'm sitting there in the spin class spinning, and I just got Tim in my mind. I'm like, fuck you, man. I'm going to make this work. And it was awesome. So that's what helped get me through it.
Spinning.
Yeah, so.
Frustrated designers, spin class.
Hey, man, spinning's great.
Sit in the back, you see all the butts going up.
Well, listen, I spin in L.A., so it's nice.
I know. Okay.
Because you know what you got there. You got anyway.
Yeah.
You guys want professional talk? You want real talk? I'll tell you what you got in the spin class, but because the Desperate Housewives live in Santa Monica, you know what I'm saying? And you can, you're sitting there. You can anyway. So.
This is why I moved out.
Right. I understand.
In George Lucas's words, the cars, the money, the women.
Yeah.
I'm the only human. I
Yes.
got to get out of here. Okay. So. So this is a pattern that exists, right? And we deal with it with things like spinning. We deal with it. Now, the lead programmer, he has a particularly interesting role because he's got you by the balls better than anyone else, right? Because, now this is my perception of it. Because the lead programmer is in control of the code. This is not filmmaking, right? This is not like a really good director and cinematographer get up there and the cameraman isn't doing what they say and they just fire his ass and get another cameraman and they do what he says. This is the guy who understands the code intimately.
Yes.
In this case, Tim. May or may not be jiving with the vision of the game. Doesn't mean he's not good. Doesn't mean he's not right.
No, he's quite good. He's very good, which makes it worse.
So the better they are, then the more that they'll have a strong view on that. And if there's disagreements in exactly how you feel something should behave, like one of the things that I've encountered a lot, and I've worked with some really great programmers, I'm really fortunate and love the guys, the most recent, Charles Bloom. I don't know, you guys know Charles Bloom, brilliant programmer. But occasionally we would have disagreements on, like, controls.
Right.
And you can say whatever you want as the director or as the creative, but if you're a lead programmer or the guy that has enough clout to, give you all the reasons why you're wrong, and technically explain in whatever language, ancient Babylonian, why you're wrong, it can be really hard to get what you need. That's one of the things that makes this medium really unique, is that we are more, as an entertainment medium, we are more code dependent than anything else out there, including visual effects. Mm-hmm. And because this is all real time. So when you start hitting heads with your lead programmer, that can be what makes or breaks a project.
In our case, it was good. In our case, that conflict was really valuable. And I think the reality is Sony is set up where there is a game director, at least Sony Santa Monica. I can't speak to the other studios because I just don't know. But in Sony Santa Monica, there is a game director, there is a lead producer, and there are individuals that all of those guys report to Shannon, the producer. Nobody reports to me, and that's sort of a necessity to the way that I feel the structure works. And so, Tim and Shannon would talk, and there were times where I would do things that were incorrect. And I think to be a game director, you do have to be passionate, but you also have to be rational. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to sort of put your ego aside, because for me, it was a very personal game, but the decisions made the valve was totally open for anybody who would contribute to that game. And sometimes, Tim would have totally valid reasons why what he wanted was not helping that overall core vision, and he would be absolutely right. And other times I would feel he was wrong, and we would butt heads a lot on that. But ultimately, the way Sony's structured is, I don't have to have Tim's buy-off. I'd be a fool if 90% of the time I didn't seek it out and embrace it. But the reason the structure is the way it is because of those 10% where we're simply going to disagree and there's nothing that can happen. I can make the call, and if he chooses to ignore that, that's a problem that him and Shannon work out, and I get back to working on the game. Right. And so I think that's worked really well. And like I said, that's not to say it's a dictatorship, because Tim's a gamer, and most of the guys on the team are gamers, and the women. We have a strange proportion of women on the God of War team, which is great. It was surprising that a game like that would attract but more often than not, he had really valid, good gamer points, and we put him in.
So it's agree to disagree.
It's agree to disagree, be respectful.
The producer settles it.
Well, agree to disagree, or the producer pretty much figures out how to get what I need, unless what I'm asking for is going to hurt the schedule or hurt the budget.
So, throughout the course of production, did you ever think of giving up?
Always, yeah. This game taught me more about tenacity and sticking to it than anything in my life. I mean, this has been. I never want to do it again, but I didn't realize the power that existed in tenacity until I did this game. And there were times where I remember Shannon came to my desk once, and it was just going particularly terrible. And I said to her, I said, you know what? We were talking. I don't remember what it was about, but we were talking about ways to. This is the problem, and we got to fix it. And fixing it would have entailed deviating too much from the core vision of what I wanted the game to be. And I remember telling her, I said something along the lines of, I don't really care if this kills my career. I don't care if the game is canceled. I don't care if we go down because of this. And it was probably as dorkily dramatic as how I'm making it out to be, because I was very fired up. But I said, this is what we're going to do, and I'm okay getting fired over this. And I think you have to be. I think you have to be willing to walk away, and you have to be willing to kind of do something else with your life, because otherwise, and this doesn't apply to everybody, and I've said this before, and I've gotten shit for saying this, but I do think the industry, more than not, is an industry of incredibly talented craftspeople that the industry would not exist without, and the industry needs in order to move it forward. So those guys, it's like, it can be, and it should be, a very fulfilling, exciting, well-paying, well-rewarded job. But to those guys, I think, it's different than if you're the guy who's sitting and guiding the creative vision of a product. You need to be willing to step aside or to walk away if you're having to compromise to the level that your job isn't satisfactory anymore. And so I got to a point where I was willing to do that, and I think there was value to that.
I think also that the games that we've really come to love, I think all of us, and the game community can really love games that the market doesn't necessarily respond to. But the game communities come to love. All of those games, in my experience from what I've seen, I've never seen one that smoothly went through the production pipeline without great turmoil and great skepticism, meeting that creative vision along the way. There wasn't just basically a nightmare throughout production that then ended up great. And actually the same goes for films, I think, too. With the exception of a rare director like Clint Eastwood or something. They say he shows up on a set, everyone leaves at a certain time every day, it's really well organized, there's no screaming, all these things. But like Larry from CAA, his boss, I heard say, every time we knew we had a sure thing, it lost.
Yeah.
Only the films that we weren't sure about, that went through horrendous productions, that had crazy, passionate, creatives leading them and directing them, those wound up being the biggest winners. But the one that we were just like, yes, this is the sure thing. I mean, the game industry is a little different, right? We know Gran Turismo 4 is a sure thing.
Right.
And the path, there's a lot of work in there, but you're not going through the same kind of process of developing entirely new mechanics.
And making games like you're describing really is the least financially savvy way to make a game. No, with the exception of people who come to conferences like this and people who read IGN and GameSpot regularly, there ain't a lot of people out there demanding artistic products. They do want Gran Turismo 4 and Resident Evil 5 and, which is great. I mean, I'm sure those games will be great, but they're not looking for that. And I think one of the things I question a lot and I wonder about a lot is, if people, I don't know. It's weird. It's like, what is the ultimate goal? Why are we working so hard to find a way to express ourselves in a medium that the audience, for the most part, doesn't seem to care if we express ourselves or not?
Right.
What are we doing?
Well, you just touched on it. You touched on some of the press, and so we're releasing games.
Yep.
And I've seen major changes in the press in the 11 years that I've been in the business. And the biggest change that I saw is that 11 years ago, a great game would be released. No one had heard about it. 3 months later, it's on the cover of all the game magazines. Everyone starts to learn about a great game. Today, that just does not happen. Today, I mean, I've read some of this in some of your blog stuff.
Yep.
Where here's a quote, second string PR monkeys for a lot of the game journalists, you know. But
wait a second. I don't disagree with that. However, this is what infuriates me. I didn't say that. This guy on Next Gen said that. And then somebody attributed that to me because he was talking about what I had said. I had written this thing, which about game journalists, where I was being relatively critical. And then he writes this really eloquent. I think his name is Colin Campbell. Do you guys know? Is that right? And he writes this very well-written piece about what I had written. And he just went off. He wrote this thing about that, and then somebody else says, "Oh, this is what Jaffe's saying." I mean, he was really vicious. I didn't say that at all, but the sentiment I agree with. So, just to be clear.
I mean, what amazes me, and I have to say, it amazes me when I watch,
And they agree with. I know. I mean, listen. Every game journalist I've ever met, I've liked. They've all been really good people, passionate about games. These guys aren't sitting there going, they want to do this. This is their job, and this is what, in the same way we have to sort of compromise sometimes to sort of pay the rent. These guys do as well, and I guarantee you they'd rather be putting "We Love Katamari" on the cover of their new issue than putting sequel number 7. But well, I don't know if it's necessarily their choice. Are there any game journalists in here at all that? Am I correct that you guys aren't looking to cover it? Right, and so I don't think they're the problem. I think they're.
But now, when we talk about the marketplace,
yes.
What's happening is the marketplace is getting informed largely. I think largely is safe to say, largely by the game press as to what
I think the marketplace
they should be going and buying.
Do you think that's true, or do you think the marketplace is getting informed by whatever big budget movie has been advertised all summer long and the license?
I think that it's an incestuous relationship that way. Yeah. Where when I see a publisher can release a horrendous licensed movie.
Yep.
I mean, not only the movie might be horrendous, but then the game might be even more horrendous, right? And that game is on the cover of 30% of the 40% of the game magazines on the shelf, and then that game's horrible. Right?
Yes.
Now, if you're a development team and you release a game that maybe you talked about some features that didn't make it in the final cut, or maybe maybe it got caught up in some hype that people didn't necessarily feel lived up. The next time the press is at you, they're like, "Hey, I'm not so sure about a cover on that next one because we gave you a good article on that one, and it wasn't quite. It only scored an 85, and we thought it would be a 95." So, but here now they're putting the same company's next licensed turd all over the cover of the magazines everywhere. And what are they telling the public? This is my personal beef. What are they telling the public? They're telling the public, look, this is what you should be watching for, man, because this is going to be on all the bus stands and all the things and all this stuff. Forget that we told you that last licensed. I won't mention publishers.
But in a lot of ways, a lot of game developers potentially are in the same boat as a lot of people who write for magazines, and that. I wouldn't say we, because Sony rarely does a licensed product. I mean, it's first party. We're about bringing new products, but the market in general, though, it's like, look, we got to sell stuff, and if we can piggyback on the $80 million marketing campaign of Catwoman, then
I didn't say that.
I did. And look, I know some people at EA. Anybody at EA who's like, "Sweet man, you're dissing Catwoman." Really? I mean, do you think? I mean,
No, not at all. And there's a lot of great people.
Catwoman's the free one. Even the EA guys can probably, bag on Catwoman. They're like, yeah, we know.
But the reason I bring this point is not to trash on publishers, because the publishers are in a difficult position as well.
Absolutely.
And when we're not caught up in the passions of making a game or trying to keep on getting it funded or whatever it is, it's you can stand in their shoes and understand a lot of the challenges that they face, especially with the rising cost of games and all. But where I'm more identifying the problem is that if we're in a vicious cycle where we're not, first of all, something really innovative that isn't a brand license is having a harder time getting out there anyway. Now, if the press doesn't really support that, or if it rates it on the same scale where Gran Turismo 4, as an example, right? It's a near-perfect game. Well, it sure as shit should be. By the fourth iteration of all the refinements, of all the mechanics, of all the successes, the budgets, and all these things, it should be a near-perfect game, right? Now it goes out and we get a 10. or whatever.
Right.
And we get a 10. But here's another game that took a lot of leaps in innovation, that took a lot of different trials in the trenches, that had to do testing and try to wind up into a polished third iteration game, but it tried it on the first rep. The game press is judging that on the same metric. And they'll go, well, this one's a 7.5.
That I think you can squarely lay at the feet of the guys who actually write.
Right.
And I don't know why. I'd be curious what the logic is, because there's two things I see. I saw like Advent Rising. Everybody who played Advent Rising knows that it did not anywhere come close to reaching the potential it should have reached. At the same time, though, there was some really interesting stuff in that game that wasn't even discussed in the press. And the other thing that drives me nuts is, the reviewers get caught up in the hype, I think, or they get paid. I don't know. But sometimes you'll go back and you'll look at a score and you'll go, that game was really hyped, that game was really anticipated, and you guys gave that a 10, or you guys gave that a 9. And you know good and well now, because you'll talk to people now, and everybody will be like, well, yeah, it was a good game. It's like a 7. And it's like everybody says that. And it's like, are they getting either paid or are they getting caught up in the hype? I have no clue. But it does seem, and I'm not saying they do this all the time, but I think we would all agree, that we've seen that on like big games at Christmas time that get these great reviews. And then you're like, that seems a little off, to the point of being off, like it seems maybe somewhat off. Like, right? I mean,
yeah, it's hard not to.
What's that? Well, yeah, that wasn't in America. I guess that was in the UK where there was a big thing over that. Yeah. And let me preface this, by the way, by saying I actually like Halo 2 more than Halo 1, and I know that's like blasphemous.
It is.
I understand. But so I really liked Halo very much, Halo 2 especially. But I'll hear now people will say, can you believe EGM gave Halo straight, I think they gave Halo 2 straight 10s. And everybody now is like, Halo 2 doesn't deserve straight 10s. Now, I actually really liked Halo 2, so I'm not knocking Halo 2 or EGM.
Were you playing single-player mode or multiplayer?
I was playing both. But it did strike me as odd that there seems to be a large consensus amongst people that game is not a 10 out of 10 game. And so you do wonder, is anybody from EGM here?
Or shoot.
Yeah, I'm not bagging on EGM. I'm just curious with the thought process. Did they genuinely think that's what that was, or were they just kind of caught up in the excitement of a new Halo? I don't know. I don't know.
And that's like, and it may sound like I'm digging on the press a little, but what I'm actually doing is just trying to identify a larger problem to see more of the games that I think inspire a lot of the people in this room to want to make games, which is we need to sort of have more of a community understanding that if we don't promote innovation, even when it's retro, right? If we don't necessarily push that, then we're not fostering it to get financed down the road. And we're all in a really tight spot of how much games cost, what the conditions are, what we think the public wants versus what we tell them is great, and and then they make their own reactions. But in the Walmart world we're living in, it would be great to see more cooperation and more support for the various innovations and retro aspects that are going well, that aren't necessarily the cover, that aren't necessarily adding up to aligning with big licenses and things like that, but that we're trying to make a little more of an effort to signal to the public that there's more risk-taking that they should be doing as well.
But I think we have a responsibility, and we did try to address this on God of War. I think developers have a responsibility to take the market into account, because a lot of times you'll get innovation that feels really unique and different, but to an extent it's almost, unless your publisher has come right out and said, we want quirky for the sake of just, putting a flag in the ground for having a quirky title, I think it's relatively fair to say that it's almost disrespectful to the place that you're getting the money from not to open the valves of what, you don't want to be a slave to the consumer, but you also don't want to go spending $20 million or even $10 million of the publisher's money or your own money, just like, fuck it, I don't care.
Right.
I mean, you need, and I think maybe the publishers might be a little bit more open to innovation if it was kind of couched a little bit more in sort of an embracing of the fact that we are also a business. And sometimes I have a hard time finding developers who sort of get that it's both.
Yeah.
And I think there's value to that, and I think there's success to be had with that philosophy.
And I have to admit, that's a great point. Because if you're trying to convince the forces to support the game that you want to build, but you're really not putting that in any sort of economic or marketplace reality, then it's going to be a very, unlikely. It'll be unlikely that you get funded.
And you might get funded, but it ain't going to sell.
It ain't going to sell. And the chances, So it's an ongoing cycle. The designers definitely have to be aware of this. And the more you can speak that language, the better your chances.
I think so.
So going on to games as a medium before we wrap up.
Okay.
Games as a medium and where it's going. One of the reasons I got into games was not because of what games were, but what I thought games could be. Okay. And that didn't mean I had any sort of elitism on it. It was just like, wow, here's this medium. Look at what these people are doing with it. And I was blown away, not necessarily by what had manifest, but by what was coming. And that's where, as a creative, you look at it and you go, wow, this has such potential. Now, we happen to be, at this point in time, sort of segmenting that potential into certain genres that we know can sell. But where do you see the medium going, and what excites you about what the possibilities are?
I hate to give this is my answer to also where games are. I don't know where it's going. I don't care where it's going. All I care about is, I'm not being flipped to your question. It's an answer to the way I work, which is, and the way I suggest other people work, which is every day you get up and you find what excites you and you pursue that. And so right now for me it's video games. And so right now it's the game I happen to be working on. And I think the minute you sort of step out of that living in the moment of doing your work and trying to say, where's this going? What does it mean? Can they be more important than they are? Is there legitimacy? It's like, you know what? If you're wrestling with those questions, then you may not be ready to actually do the work that's needed to actually create the product. And so for me, I try to stay away from that stuff because it's just sort of, it's kind of bad vibey. You know what I mean? For me.
Yeah.
So.
But you have said in the past, you want to see more questions of what is the medium capable of.
Oh, yeah, I wrote that on my blog.
Yeah.
But anybody who's read my blog knows that I'm here one day and I'm here the next. So today at GDC, and since God of War's come out, I've been like, you know what? I don't want to think about it. Somebody accused me on, I think, Gaming Age forums. They're like, Jaffe's bitching about games being like movies, but then he went off and made God of War, and that's like a movie. I'm like, dude, I know I'm a contradictory guy. I know that. I'm conflicted. I don't know. I don't have the answer. So I'd rather just kind of focus on doing the work and seeing what happens. Maybe if I'm as fortunate as Richard Garriott or even that much as talented as him, one day I'll come back for like a lifetime achievement, and they'll kind of put all my shit on the movie, and I'll go, oh, so that's what I was doing. But I don't know.
Yeah.
So not to kind of like derail the question. I just don't know.
I just know that you have dreams in there that you're, even if it's far out.
Oh, I'd like to make the holodeck. I'd like to make games for the holodeck. I think a lot of us would like to create those experiences. It's just, how do you do it? I don't know.
That's another topic.
Yeah, man, that would be cool. That would be cool.
We're wrapping up. So what I'd like to do is, it's kind of a rare opportunity to have David here. Questions? Yes, you were the first one up.
Yeah. I'm surprised by the amount of...
Oh.
That guy's so mad.
Is he on your team?
Yeah, that's right.
It's on? All right. I'm surprised by the amount of resentment you seem to have, considering the creative positions that you have. You guys make great games. You had a lot of creative powers. And so I was wondering, for those who are struggling to just make games out there, and they don't necessarily work on original IP,
yep.
Why is that?
Help me.
Because your games have been on the covers. We've seen Oddworld games. These games are great. We've seen God of War. So I was wondering, how come there's still resentment in your positions?
I don't necessarily understand. Define resentment in relation to how you...
Well, when you're talking, there seems to be a lot of frustration based on what's published, like what games got to get good reviews and how much creative freedom you have when you're working.
Speaking to me, I've had nothing but a good relationship with the press. I think you might have other thoughts in terms...
No, actually, I didn't want to come off as resentful or frustrated. It's more that I find myself as a believer in the medium and a believer of the ideas that the people have. It can be frustrating at times because it's an industry. And so all industries will go through their growing pains and where they're going to take the risks and where they're not going to. And actually with the game journalists and all, I can't recall really meeting one that I went, oh, that guy's an asshole. They're all pathetically passionate.
we're talking about journalism, but I'm also talking about your everyday work.
Well, what I wanted to touch on is what we're not reading in the interviews typically, what you're not necessarily getting in the other talks. So what I wanted to touch on is what are some of the challenges that are really emotionally hard to get through as when you do get those projects greenlight, when you are the creative driving force, and they're difficult challenges. I mean, those are the ones that you really don't sleep well at night, if you sleep at all, you know. I mean, we all want to, my partner, Sherry McKenna, has always said, and drilled it into my head, everyone wants to be loved, right? Everyone wants to be loved. But when you find yourself at odds with everyone because you're sticking to a vision and everyone at different points starts falling off, and because of the problems that come up in the road, you wind up very alone. And we all want to be loved, so that's pretty emotionally, you know, trying. And what my goal is, and I had heard throughout the productions that David experienced a lot of this as well. I've experienced a lot of it. If you guys know that this is what's coming when you do get that green light, then you'll deal with it better. You'll know that, oh, you know, everyone goes through this shit. Here comes my shitstorm now. It's my turn.
Yeah, it was a hard game to make. It doesn't mean I'm resentful. I appreciate the process, but it was a bitch, and it would be nice if it was easier. So.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're done.
They're out of time?
We're
That's
done.
it. We're
Anybody
out of time.
who wants to ask questions, find me. I'm around.
Yep, we'll be outside in the hall. Thank you.
Thank you.